What up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Dose. Thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate you. We're moving on to day number 88 today, you guys. Day number 88. So today we're going to be in the book of 2 Samuel, picking up where we left off yesterday. Today the scripture is chapters 4 through 8. Okay, and we're also going to be looking at Psalm 88 today. If you go click down below, it looks like we've got a link to a video from our friends at Read Scripture. Go click on that, check that out. And we have also got a copy of the daily Bible reading plan in PDF file format down below in the description. So go click on that if you do not already have that, so that you can follow along with us and be prepared in advance for what the scripture is going to be. All right, so today, jumping off into where we are picking up in 2 Samuel, we read a little story about our friend named Ishbosheth getting murdered. Okay, so if you will remember back to the other day, Joab had ended up murdering Abner, right? So Abner got killed. When that happened, Ishbosheth lost courage. He pretty much just grew weary, and he just got depressed, and he was no longer courageous. He felt like I guess he couldn't do it on his own, maybe. And now that his commander of his army was gone, I guess he felt kind of lonely. So we learn also that Jonathan has a son, Mephibosheth. Okay? And this is something that we did not know until right now, that Jonathan had a son. We read that Jonathan's son was handicapped in some way. It says that he was lame in both feet. So I'm not sure if maybe he had some kind of a birth defect, or if he had been injured as a child and he had trouble walking. I don't really know for sure. So moving on from there, we read that there are two raiding band leaders that end up killing Ishbosheth during his nap, right? So these raiding bands, they would go around and basically just conduct small raids on people whose outposts were kind of around the outskirts of cities and towns and things of that nature. And they would go out just looking for stuff that they could loot. So these guys end up deciding, hey, we're going to go kill Ishbosheth. And not only that, but they do it while he was taking a nap. Okay? Now, unfortunately, they make a bad mistake, similar to a mistake that was made a little bit earlier on that we read about a couple days back. These guys cut off Ishbosheth's head, and they take it to David. Maybe they did that because they remember when David killed Goliath, he took Goliath's head off and took it back, right? Maybe that's why they did it. I don't know for sure. But in any case, these two leaders of these raiding bands, they chop the head off and they bring it to David. I'm assuming they're expecting David to say, oh, wow, you have put my enemy to death. So good for you. Here you go. Here's a reward. That's not how it plays out. David ends up having them killed for their wicked deed, because they killed this guy, and not only did they kill him, but they didn't do it with any sort of regard. It was cowardly. They took him out in his sleep, right? They didn't even provide him an opportunity to fight back, right? So David is not pleased at all by this, and he has them killed. Next, we move into the section that talks a little bit about David becoming the king over Israel, okay? So after Saul dies, the tribal leaders end up going to David, and they come to the realization that David is God's anointed. They're like, okay, well, yeah, we get it. We accept God's decision. It's you, and, we're willing to bow to you, basically, and let you lead us as king. So at that time, they anoint David. We read that he was 30 years old when he gets officially anointed as king. He ruled over Judah. Again, that's not the entirety of the Israelites, just over Judah, for 7.5 years. And then after that 7.5 year mark, that is when all of Israel, after Ishbosheth dies, this is when all of Israel kind of comes together and says, yeah, so we'll go ahead and let you rule over us. So from the time that happened, David ruled over all of Israel for 33 more years. So he ruled over a portion of Israel for the first 7.5 years of his reign. And then after he gets officially anointed, Then he reigns for 33 more years. Now, we read about David conquering Jerusalem in the next section. So David defeats the Jebusites. They were the folks that were in Jerusalem at this time. Okay? When he defeats them, he takes the city and he names it the City of David. That's what he calls the City of David. So then we go on to read that the king of Tyre sent David supplies and craftsmen to build him a palace. So this place, Tyre, I guess the king was like, hey, I need to get on David's good side. I'm going to butter him up. I'm going to send him some materials, some supplies, and some craftsmen to build him an official palace in this new town that he calls the City of David. Okay, so we go on to read that David takes more wives and he has more children. Next section goes into a little bit about David and the Philistines. Okay, so the Philistines assemble for battle. It's not the first time this has happened, right? We've seen that happen before, where the Philistines kind of mount up, gather the troops, and they sort of plan this battle, this plan of attack to go into battle with the Israelites. So the Philistines assemble for battle. David inquires of the Lord. He's like, hey, God, what's going on? They're assembling against me. What do I need to do? And God tells him, go ahead and go to battle. So the Israelites basically wipe the floor with the Philistines. They take them out. They win by a big margin. Okay, so now that David has kind of settled Jerusalem and made that the City of David, it's kind of the capital where the king lives right now, right? The ark gets brought to Jerusalem. So David calls for the ark to be moved from where it's at to Jerusalem. The ark is transported on an ox cart. Now, I believe that back when the law was being given, back in the first 5 books, right? I don't remember exactly the scripture that it was in, but when all the instructions were given about building the ark and about assembling the temple, or the tabernacle, assembling the tabernacle and how it needed to be put together and taken down and moved, I believe that there were supposed to be a couple of long rod, like poles, that went down both sides of the ark and kind of hooked in there, and so that there could be a person on each side in the back and a person on each side in the front. And I believe that the ark was supposed to be carried by people via these poles. In this case, that doesn't seem to be happening. They're using an ox cart to transport the ark, and this could be problematic because I don't know what the design was like of the ox carts they used back then, but if the ox decides to go crazy and swing, make a sharp turn this way or that way, what happens if the cart tips over? It'd be a problem, right? Well, we're kind of about to find out what happens. So the ox stumbles, and the ark is going to slide off the cart. I don't know if a wheel broke or what happened on the cart, but whatever the case may be, when the ox stumbled, the ark starts sliding. It's about to come off. So this guy named Uzzah, or sometimes it's pronounced Uzzah, he reaches out his hand to keep the ark from falling, right? You would think that's the right thing to do. You don't want to see the ark come crashing down and possibly break all over the place and get damaged. So this guy puts his hand out. Well, unfortunately, nobody was allowed to touch the ark. That's why God prescribed for it to be carried via these poles that would attach to it. So God struck down Uzzah, struck him down for touching the ark. Unfortunately, God had prescribed requirements for how the ark was to be handled and transported, and unfortunately Uzzah, whether he meant well or not, he still went against what those prescribed commandments and instructions were. So, at this point, David gets afraid. David's pretty scared. He'd taken the ark to Obed-Edom's house at this point, and I guess Obed-Edom was relatively close by. It was just somewhere that the ark could be taken until they could, assess the situation and mourn what happened with this guy, Uzzah. So, the ark stays there at Obed-Edom's house for 3 months, and during that time, the Lord blesses his entire house. We've seen that when the ark gets brought into enemy territory, it tends to bring curses with it. When the ark gets brought into an Israelite's house or a town, it makes everything around it flourish. So David hears of the blessings and all the good stuff that's going on around the ark. So he says, okay, well, we can go ahead and continue with the move. We can bring the ark over into the City of David. So at this point, we read a little bit about God's promise to David. So we are introduced at this point to a guy named Nathan. Nathan was a prophet to David. Okay, so again, a prophet is someone who would speak the words of God to man. There was usually some sort of a divine connection between God and a prophet, whereas the prophet could know things that a normal person would not be able to know. Sometimes they would be able to see the future, see things that were coming. Sometimes they would be able to work just crazy miracles. So this guy Nathan was a prophet, and he was a prophet to David. So David tells Nathan he wants to build a temple for the Lord. Okay, so this tabernacle that they've been using to house God in, basically, the presence of God, this tabernacle made up of cloth and, wooden beams with the different little utensils and implements that were inside. David basically says, look, I'm living in this palace, and God and the ark, they're staying in this little tabernacle that's made of like leather and cloth, and it's not super fancy to look at, So David says, Nathan, I want to do this. I want to build an actual, like, real temple for the Lord, not something that is temporary and that can be moved around, but a permanent place. So God gives some promises for Nathan to tell David. Then we read about a section that is entitled David's Prayer, okay, which obviously David prays to God. There are a number of praises mentioned, and David worships the Lord. Next, we move on to a little section about David's various victories that he comes across during his time as king, and we read about some of the various officials and rulers that were involved during this time. So that covers a pretty good bit of ground, and we have been pushed beyond the 10-minute mark that I try to shoot for. So I'm going to bypass the points of interest for today, and we will just continue on tomorrow and pick up where we left off. So thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate you, and I hope that you guys have a blessed day. Enjoy your day, walk with the Lord, and we'll see you again tomorrow. So until we meet again, deuces.